Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. And I know some of you have also been to the big hall to witness the signing of an agreement. So this part, we will be hearing from a number of distinguished experts about various topics relating to the environment. So I'm Christine Lowe of HKUST, and it's my great privilege today to be the Director of Traffic. So since we're starting slightly late, what I will do is not make a keynote speech, but let's get on to hearing the experts that we have. So our first speaker is Dr. ZHOU Jinfeng. He is the Secretary General of China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation and a Fellow of World Academy of Arts and Science. And after Dr. ZHOU speaks, we will be followed by 4 other distinguished speakers, and I will introduce each one of them. Dr. ZHOU, please.
Is it okay I talk in Chinese? Or? Okay. I'm sorry for those who don't speak Chinese. But we have the PPT in English as a brief. 大家下午好，我非常抱歉呢，用中文讲，然后但是我的 PPT 是英文的，可能有所帮助吧。今天我给大家分享的是美丽中国和生态文明。地球经历了6次生物大灭绝，那恐龙是在6500万年前白垩纪灭绝的。那么科学家在上个世纪90年代得出结论，地球已经进入了第6次大灭绝。这次的灭绝速度呢，比恐龙那一次还要来得快。在这之前的恐龙灭绝之前，还有一个2叠纪、3叠纪的灭绝。最近刚刚有一篇论文发表，说那次灭绝的一个可能的原因是 mega El Nino， 就是巨厄尔尼诺效应，就比现在我们常见的要大很多。经过地质考察，那一次的巨厄尔尼诺效应导致了那一次的大灭绝，恐龙前一次的大灭绝。那么地球上的物种呢，超过80%的物种都灭绝了。这是我们今天面临的最基础的主要的挑战。我们知道气候危机呢，它根本上对于我们带来最主要的威胁还是生物多样性的危机，物种的灭绝导致的连续性崩溃性的效应。人类社会呢，刚才是地球46亿年呢，经历了5次大灭绝，现在进入了第6次大灭绝。那人类社会呢，100万年呢，经历了3次的文明，首先是原始文明，然后是农业文明，后边是工业文明。今天呢，我们要开启的是生态文明。为什么要开启生态文明呢？就是因为工业文明带来人类能力的强大，和前5次灭绝不一样。这第6次灭绝的主要原因呢，是因为地球上的一个新的物种，因为人类带来的整个系统性的、全面的人类的栖息地的崩溃。这是今天我们面临的最根本的挑战。也是因为这个挑战，我们经历了很多年的努力，仍然没有办法缓解这个挑战。大家知道，这个2015年，习主席去纽约参加联合国千年计划的总结会，参加联合国后千年计划的签署。在这个会议开始之前呢，中国政府向全世界发布了中国政府联合国千年计划报告。这个报告，联合国千年计划是2000年全世界领导人共同签署的一个计划，它有8大任务。那么经过15年之后，中国政府向世界报告说， 我们有一项任务呢没有完成，大家知不知道是什么任务？中国政府做了15年做不到，大家知道吗？有人知道吧？没有人知道，就是7B 项，就是联合国8大任务的第7项。8大任务包括环境、扶贫、妇女、教育，一共8个。第7项是环境，7B 项是生物多样性丧失速度放缓。全世界的政治家、科学家说，我们要做这件事用15年。15年之后，中国政府向世界说：“对不起，这是8大任务中唯一一件事情，我们中国没有做到。”同时，全世界也没有做到。大家知道，2020年在中国召开的联合国生物多样性公约第15届缔约国大会，在这个会议之前，我们参加了联合国系列的评估，我们去了Montreal、Nairobi、Rome、Geneva， 然后系统的评估。结果呢是什么呢？当时，大家说我们生物多样性危机很严重，第6次大灭绝不得了，我们要制定一个最后的时间窗口，我们要制定一个雄心勃勃的计划。在这个计划制定之前，我们回顾10年前全世界的这个公约，在日本爱知县订立了一个叫爱知目标，它是用10年做20件事情。那么在这个大会开之前就要总结上次会议的这爱知目标，结果是什么呢？大家知不知道？结果是10年前人类各国政府定的这个爱知目标10项20个目标，没有1个完成了。所以我们人类的快车在冲向断崖，它不是停下来，也不是减速，也不是匀速，是在加速度冲向断崖。这就是我们今天面临的形势。而且各国政府经过几十年的努力，到今天有了很大的效果，但是这个趋势、这个速度仍然在加速的冲向断崖。这就是为什么人类怎么办呢？就必须开启一个新的文明，要开启一个新的生活方式和生产方式。仅仅是这样的传统的做法不管用。为什么？我举个例子，这个图片的这个鸟呢，是能飞的最重的鸟，叫 Great Bastard 大宝。这种鸟啊，国家1级保护动物，最重要的保护动物。然后全世界它的东方亚种只有200多只了，保护了很多年，在内蒙古专门设立了国家土木级大宝保护区，设立了保护区，定为1级，保护了几十年，最后直线下降，走向灭绝。为什么？因为传统的濒危物种和保护区这个做法不管用。为什么不管用？因为到冬天，这个鸟就迁徙了，它要到热的地方去，它就飞到黄河边上。这些鸟很聪明，但是它们在空中不知道哪是国家保护区，它们只好随便落到它们传统的平坦的河岸上、麦田里去栖息。但是当地就开始有人打猎了，因为它是能飞的最重的鸟，非常好打猎，它肯定会灭绝，按我们传统的工作方法。那么我们当地的志愿者开始保护它，把这个打猎的弄到派出所去，派出所说这我们不管，因为工业文明都专业化的，保护区才管这事儿，一般的派出所不管这事儿。找到县政府，县政府说我们也不管，试着去申请，要通过3年，有程序，3年这个鸟就灭绝了。怎么办？我们在那里立刻，2016年4月17日，他们联系到我，18号我们给他盖了章，成立了第1个中华大宝保护地，就是第1个社区保护。我们支持志愿者，给他牌照，给他一个牌子，让他们去保护，效果非常好。从2016年开始，我们现在设立了在全国设立了200多个保护区，就是社区保护、群众的保护。结果呢，大宝的数字从触底反弹，从200只到2000只，现在到上万只。我们在整个的中国的北方建立了10几个社区保护地，只要它落脚，最近2年我们发现它开始在北京落脚了，数量多了。那么在北京落脚，我们就在北京立刻就建一个保护，这个就是 这是我们要讲的美丽中国，不只是传统意义上的工业文明的山川美丽，是我们的行动、我们的保护、我们的努力。这是蜜蜂，大家都喝过蜂蜜。蜂蜜由于工业文明推广的优良品种，现在中国的蜂农绝大多数养的都是什么蜜蜂啊？大家知不知道？意大利蜂 （Italian bees）， 很少有蜂农养 Chinese bees。Chinese bees is endangered。中华蜂濒危了，为什么呢？因为意大利蜂是优良品种，个子大、产蜜高、挣钱多，所以大家都养意大利蜂。意大利蜂，中华蜂没有了。中华蜂没有了会怎么样？中华蜂和意大利蜂有一点区别，它不光是个子小，它在春天早1个月出来，它去采花粉。没了中华蜂，那些早春2月的小草就结不了籽，结不了籽怎么办？来年它们就长不了草了。中华蜂比大熊猫还珍贵，这是美丽中国。在疫情期间呀，蜂农在封闭的地区不能上路了，花谢了之后没有办法了，我们成立蜂巢基金，帮助他们，给国务院写信，帮助他们。特别批的，而且我们有特殊承诺，我们蜂农承诺呀，不进村，不和人接触，我们就在野外把蜜蜂养好。如果不允许他们上路，会怎么样？湖北的这个油菜花就没有办法结籽了，因为没有授粉。传粉昆虫，这是生态系统，这是美丽中国。我们的努力使得我们的绿水青山继续的来抚育我们。我们在全国呢，现在是222个中华保护地，这是在华中一带的一些案例。小红点就是我们支持老百姓、志愿者、社区来在生产生活之中参与保护活动。电网，国家电网在工业文明中是一个很重要的工具，它要保证输电用电。那么为了保证输电用电呢，它就电网上的鸟窝是很大的风险，它会导致断电，会带来很大的问题。那么现在呢，国家电网开始建立一个叫邻里生物多样性保护的系统，和我们合作，一边保证供电，一边呢建立全国的鸟类救护网络。鸟受了伤，它稍微救治一下，让它返回自然。另外，在线路设计的时候，有意的避让鸟类的关键的路径。你现在风电、光伏，它们都存在这样的问题。它们是绿色的清洁能源，但是它们如果和生物多样性冲突的时候，它们要让路。这是我们一些图片。这个池塘用工业文明呢，收完藕之后呢，就把水弄干，然后开始撒铺药，为了来年来再种这个藕塘啊，种藕，为了保证呢不生病，为了这藕长得大好看。但是这行不行啊？不行的，因为那些濒危的鸟类，包括昆虫和微生物，因此大规模全面的进行消杀之后，它们都没有了家园。所以呢，我们倡导传统的农业、传统的农法，到冬天来了之后，我不把水放干，我留一点水，里面让一点小虫子，我们很快就发现濒危的鸟类找到了新的家园。这是我们真正的美丽中国。还有什么是美丽中国呀？我们的一个同事回老家去，看到了这个几十年前他读小学的时候，这个旧书店依然开在那里。那么这个旧书店带来了大量的书的循环使用，这是美丽中国。因为大量的现代的图书的，包括图书、快消品、儿童的书，用一下就进垃圾场了，它带来的生态的代价是我们不能承受的。这是美丽中国。我们通过环境公益诉讼，做这个，你像这个无小叶气，这个全世界只有在雅砻江流域有这么几百棵非常珍贵的和植物中大熊猫。但是呢，现在要建水电站，那么就会把这最后的栖息地淹掉了。 这些物种的它是关联性的，就像我刚才讲的，中华蜂没了，那大量的草就会没有。它们是关联性的，它是多米诺效应的，这是我们所需要保护的山水林田湖草沙滨，是我们的美丽中国。这不是应付国际的什么舆论，这是我们为了中华民族，也为了世界人民的可持续发展、永续发展。那么，有一种植物叫 Conophytum， 就是肉锥，放在花盆里养，非常好看。我估计，港科大也肯定有同学和老师养这种植物，但是由于大家养，由于现在的手段，那么去年全部200多个品种物种肉锥，它是属界门纲目科属种，一共有200多个种，全部同时被 CITES 列为第2目录2、目录3濒危物种。为什么呢？因为大家喜欢肉锥了之后，那小植物养着好看，觉得自己爱生命、爱生活、保护生物。但是，就是由于他们的喜欢，这种生物只有在南部非洲野外生长。由于大家喜欢，就有人去非洲野外，挖它，挖了它在网上卖，结果一下子几十个物种在野外基本上是灭绝，所有200个种全部濒危。怎么办？我们怎么办？在中国它不是濒危物种，它也不是目录中动物，我们就起诉了一个最有名的卖这个花的一个所谓的爱好者，宠物也是这样，都在这么干。最后我们在法院里还输了，打不赢，因为法院说你拿的证据，他卖的这东西是非洲那儿挖的。我们找了南非的警察，南非的警察曾经抓了这个人，但是呢，南非的法律是你交钱就可以再放掉，虽然是刑事犯罪。我时间很有限哈，我们在这里想讲的是地球生命共同体。月饼也是这样，大家都吃，但是呢，它是美丽中国需要的，不能浪费，不能过度包装。这个生物基的材料也是美丽中国。我最后还想加一个小故事，大家知道北京的小燕子，北京的雨燕，由于北京盖高楼之后，北京雨燕就没有家了，所以数量急剧下降。我们在北京雨燕的10年前，在它背上放了传感器，北京的雨燕每一只每一年都从北京飞到蒙古国，飞到中东，飞到地中海，然后飞到南非，然后再回来。北京的雨燕和欧洲的雨燕是兄弟俩，当时个子大的才选择更艰苦的任务，从欧洲呢继续往北飞，然后飞到中国来。现在每一年，北京雨燕和欧洲雨燕都回到刚果盆地去团聚，然后在北京雨燕飞到非洲南部的东，欧洲雨燕非洲南部的西。但是如果北京没有了雨燕的生存地，欧洲的雨燕也就会没有了。欧洲的，因为这个雨燕呀，它一生中绝大多数时间都在路上，在非洲，在北京只待3个月，但是它一生中只有在北京这个3个月产小燕子，所以北京没了家，雨燕就会灭绝。雨燕灭绝了，怎么样？雨燕控制着白蚁呀、蚊子呀就会爆发，那么艾滋病、寨卡，很多人受共染病就会爆发。人类的生活的整个地球，接这个故事，我想讲呢，我们生活在一个船上，人类命运共同体，地球生命共同体。这个船漏了一个洞，雨燕没有生存了。不管你在这个船的桅杆还是任何地方，你都没有办法生存下去。谢谢大家。
周老师，谢谢你非常动听的演讲。Thank you very much. And I think of 2 points immediately. One is we do have bees in Hong Kong. We are also making small quantities of honey in Hong Kong. So perhaps the next time you come, we'll go and have a look to see whether they are Chinese bees or Italian bees. The other thing that I think Hong Kong can play a role in is with trafficking, illegal trafficking of biodiversity products, Yes, and Hong Kong is a major trafficking center. So I imagine there is something we can do here. So if I can now invite the second speaker, James WADHAM, who's the president of Ave Phoenix Philanthropy Group, who will talk to us about the role of philanthropy.
I'll try to.
Please. Hey.
Do I need to press anything? No, just speak like this. I brought along two props with me to emphasize how people think they understand the need for sustainability and those that don't. Here are two beautifully constructed wooden stirrers for coffee, now that we can no longer use plastic. Now, the abolition of plastic is without a doubt a good thing. But can we go the full distance that we need to? Switching to wood is fine. So here are two that I picked up in the course of the last few days. This shorter one fits inside most coffee cups, and it's a little bit thinner than the other one. And it works perfectly well, and you can take it home, put it in your pocket, and take it with you next time. The other one, slightly longer, slightly fatter, and therefore slightly more wasteful, may be suitable for those that buy buckets of coffee, but it's also somebody has taken the trouble and wasted the energy to print the name of their coffee company on the stick. They must produce millions of these, and the energy that was wasted by heat sealing their name onto the stick compared with the plain one is a complete waste of energy. And every bit of energy that we waste is doing more damage. That's it for props from me. I don't have anything like this up there. That isn't the way I lecture. I lecture in a very old-fashioned way. I lecture as I was lectured to when I was an undergraduate a long, long time ago. Almost exactly 10 years ago, I was at an opening ceremony not dissimilar to this. It was for the opening of the Mocha Mountain village in St. Lucia in the Caribbean. The Mocha Mountain village had been built as a response to a hurricane, Hurricane Tomas, that breezed through the Caribbean in 2010. It then took another 4 years to get the replacement village for the people back. And I will come back to this story because it's relevant to one of the things that I hope to get across from my few brief words. But really, in between very important speeches, especially that we just heard from Dr. ZHOU, I've taken my role as being largely the entertainment. We're here today as a start to doing something. It's not good enough to talk about it. It's not even good enough to understand it. As Karl Marx said in his critique of the philosophers, understanding the world is not enough. The point is to change it. And that's what organizations like GDF are actually doing. Making changes, one great bustard at a time. It is actually very important. One of the things, of course, which organizations like GDF and others around the world need to do their work is money. And that's where people like I come in. And I am standing before you actually as an example of organizations which should not have to exist. If society really cared about everybody and everything in it, everything would be fully funded. You wouldn't need to find outsiders. You wouldn't need to go begging for money to do your important research, because everything would be fully funded. But unfortunately, we are not yet in an eco-civilization and a caring civilization. Therefore, we have to find ways to access money, because there is quite a lot of it out there. In all of the lectures which I give, whether they're 3 hours long, which is really wearing for everybody, or 15 minutes like today, I only try to make 5 points. I learned a long time ago that making more than 5 points is actually more than people can bear to hear. Maybe when we get to the end, we'll have worked out what my 5 points were. Or maybe you'll understand nothing, in which case you can ask Mr. NAIR, one of the other speakers, who understands a great deal about this stuff. Or maybe we'll end up like Alan Greenspan, who once famously said to the United States Senate, "I know you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant." Now, I mentioned Mr. NAIR, and there is something from his past that I will bring out that possibly he wouldn't. You know, in his youth, he spent time in South Africa, and not only fighting against the apartheid regimes, but also building water projects. The relevance of bringing this up is not to praise him, but to show that actually not much changes, because this month, my organization's African participating philanthropy group is starting a new water project in Khayelitsha in the suburbs of Cape Town. They're called suburbs, but really they're just the slums where all the black and brown people are forced to live. Now here we are, so many years on, and yet the same problems still exist, because nobody particularly cared to solve them. That problem and that solution which we are involved with is a solution which came from a university in Switzerland with which we work. And they worked out a methodology of cleaning up all the spare water that is around so that it can be reused. It's a very important piece of kit, and we're trialing it now in one place. We insisted, as part of our funding agreement with the university in Switzerland, because the role of philanthropy, as far as my group is concerned, is not to make rich countries more rich. You know, it's to actually spread knowledge and spread wealth and create opportunity. So we insisted, having got the proposal from the university, that firstly they had to have a local implementing partner. If there wasn't somebody on the ground in Cape Town that would actually be doing the work, we wouldn't fund it. And then we insisted there be a South African university brought into it, to which the technology be transferred. And then we insisted that the three organizations that we were indirectly funding would jointly own the intellectual property that was being developed so that it could be commercialized, and then these organizations could stand on their own feet. Most philanthropists hate giving money away. We like to create opportunities. Social enterprises are the way of the future, and universities need to learn to participate in exactly that. Development funds are widely available, but you've got to find the people who've got them. And then you need to break another mold. Because universities have spent a lot of their time competing with other universities, reinventing the wheel. It is absolute nonsense, and it shouldn't go on. You don't want to come along to a philanthropic funder and say, well, this has already done, but we can make it 20% better. What I'm going to say to something like that by way of an application, fine, then I'll give you 20% of the money, go and partner with the people who've already done the other 80%. Don't waste our time and our money. Cooperate, do not compete. Here's another live story that does directly impact GDF. It also concerns another university in Hong Kong, I'm embarrassed to say. We were brought a proposal a year ago this month to implement an application which has been developed by a university in Australia, which measures the health of coastal wetlands. Coastal wetlands are really where the rubber meets the road in terms of the problems that parts of the world face and are going to face, but they've been long forgotten. The proposal we received, which involves some millions of dollars in costs, we said, well, this is a wonderful proposal. Yes, we agree to do it, but there is one change that you have to make. That change that you have to make is that this is not a developed world strategy, because most of the coastlines are not in the developed world. Most of the coastlines are in the developing world. So, go make some partnerships. The project we are now signing off on, instead of it being one university in the developed world that is going to roll this out, it is now 20 universities and research organizations, one of which is GDF, who are going to roll this out across the world. The same amount of money is involved in doing it with 20 organizations globally as doing it with one organization in Australia. Figure that. How come? Well, it's because university professors in Australia get paid a shitload of money, and university professors in Costa Rica and various other parts of the world don't. But for sure, they're just as clever. Hong Kong university professors do get paid a rather large amount of money. Yeah. I'll come back to the Hurricane Tomas story because I want to address the role of civil servants in the process of reacting to problems. Problems brought by climate change, ever increasingly brought by climate change, interfered with by politics. Very few of you will remember Hurricane Tomas, because most of you are not interested in that part of the world, and most of you are a little bit too young to even remember it. But it happened the same year as the major earthquake in Haiti. When Hurricane Tomas struck, the Western media's only response to Hurricane Tomas was that it didn't hit Haiti. Never mind that people died in multiple other islands. That was not the focus. So after parts of the country of St. Lucia were destroyed, in exactly the same way as earlier this year, parts of the country of St. Vincent were destroyed by hurricanes, the government's response, the civil services response, it's better to speak in terms of civil servants because that means they're part of us. Government tends to make a feeling that it's something else, something far away, something not us. But actually it isn't. The civil service response to the people who were displaced by the hurricane was to move them to another part of the country with which they had no cultural roots. Of course, they refused. So how was a solution found? To find some land near to where they were, near where their cultural roots was, and rebuild there. Having found trusted partners, the role of the civil service is to trust those partners. Get the permits issued and get out of the way and let people who know what they're doing get on with the job. The tendency amongst those seeking funds for their wonderful projects at universities like this is to design the research or design the solution and then go looking for the money. That is probably not the best way of doing it. Perhaps a better approach is to find out what topics people with the money might find supportable, and then design a product that the marketplace actually wants. If you were designing one of these, that's exactly what you do. Treat your projects and your research exactly the same. Better yet, get really good at telling people how clever you are and how well you do things, and let them come to you because they're really interested in helping you. And that was the fifth point I had to make. So I can stop and you can be grateful. Thank you.
James, thank you so much for reminding us how to extract money for university research and projects. Our third speaker is my very good friend, Professor LAM Kin Che of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He's visiting scholar there, but he was there for many, many years, and he's going to talk to us about nature conservation in Hong Kong.
Thank you, Christine. Dear friends, I wish to start by saying how deeply honored I am being invited to address this timely and important forum. It's important because the theme touches on the quality of life and sustainability. It is timely because it is the time to act in response to the call to build an enchanting and also sustainable city. I think we are here today to ask questions. Asking questions about the world around us. Asking questions about what we have done. And also asking questions how we can do it better. To help us to understand these questions, may I invite you to think. Right. May I invite you to think about our vision, firstly, examine the wicked problems, and also to search for durable solutions. I've counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One more than the 5 suggested. I shall be trying to be brief. Okay. I think we are here also because we believe that these natural assets can enhance livability and sustainability. We're here because we think they're related to livability, particularly in Hong Kong. Now, this is particularly relevant to Hong Kong. These are the results of the latest World Competitive Study. I'm happy to see that Hong Kong has risen by 1 or 2 to be the 5th most competitive cities in the world. Let's take a look at other figures. In terms of the quality of the workforce, we are the 9th. In terms of attracting people, we are number 28. That's not a good number, right? And I think we are also losing people. In terms of air quality, we rank rather low. Okay, that highlights one important point. That is, having a good living environment is crucial to attract talented people. Hong Kong is well endowed. I think today I've taken the liberty to include under nature conservation, the nature, biodiversity, as well as countryside conservation. Now that is important in Hong Kong because whereas most people live in the city's core, we have more than 3/3, 3/4 of the land area which is either country park or the so-called rural areas. The country park and the rural areas are our extended home. This is the place which we treasure, we value, and we should conserve. I'll show you pictures of the countryside. Hong Kong is well endowed with biodiversity, thanks to the subtropical climate, and also very diverse landforms, topography, etc. And because of that, 1/3 of the birds in China can be sighted in Hong Kong. And of course, coming with that is our responsibility to contribute to global biodiversity. Let me take you to the other 30% of our land area. Apart from the city core, other than the country parks, the other so-called rural areas. There, we can see that they are not in the most desirable conditions. Agricultural lands being abandoned, houses falling apart, and also sometimes villages being deserted. The government is not unaware of all those. Government has been doing things with different emphasis at different times. Exactly 20 years ago, the focus was on nature conservation. And then in the 2016, Christine and I were together in the committee, focusing on biodiversity. And also, quite recently, a countryside conservation office was set up, followed by the formation of an advisory committee, a funding scheme, and also an expert group for Charlottetown. I'm associated with all three, being a member, being the chair, being a convener, etc. We have seen changes over time. And giving that background, I wish to highlight that there are two problems we have to face. Firstly, policy support. Now I should say, policy support is good, but policy support with resources. I haven't put the resources, okay? And also policy alignment. Firstly, sorry, I'm concerned about money. Okay, because being a member of the funding scheme, chair of the vetting committee of the funding scheme, I think the policy should be matched by resources. In the past, we have conservation projects, etc., standalone. They're provided for by the government. Some of the projects were driven by infrastructure projects as compensation schemes. For example, the first marine park in Hong Kong was the outcome of the international airport. The Long Valley Nature Park was the outcome of a rail development. It goes on and on. For those projects, there is no problem about resources. But how about the others? Countryside Conservation's funding scheme is an one-off allocation. Yes, there was a lot of money, $500 million Hong Kong, not a lot. But then, as chair of the vetting committee, I could see that in less than 5 years, we have only about 1/4 left. In 2 or 3 years' time, we'll be all gone. By that time, I may have stepped down, retired from the committee. But then the schemes, the project will have to go on. Now, that's me. Lots of projects to attend to, but without adequate resources. Coming on the list is a new venture, Charlottetown, ranked number 2 in terms of its ecological value. It's a place, a battleground of development and conservation for 40 years. Court cases, EI reports being rejected, etc. All this. Finally, government has claimed the land back because of its ecological value. In exchange, government provided people with another piece of land somewhere away. Okay, now it is in government hand. What should we do? Do we have the necessary resources? As I said, failure is not an option because it is the icon. It is a testament of government's commitment. And also, it is a precedent of land exchange. So we cannot let it fail. The second one, policy alignment. Now, most governments are structured in such a way that they're vertical. Okay, we're in so-called silos. But then for nature conservation, there's a cut across different ministries, different departments and agencies. I've seen improvements over the years, but not sufficient. And we have to do more about that. I'm concerned about, for example, the Northern Metropolis Development Strategy. We have heard promises, there are claims, but I would love to see concrete working schemes, examples, assurance that they will be done. Okay, looking for the way out. For those projects, firstly, they have to be sustainable. We have to think out of the box. And also, it has to be science-based. So I urge everyone to be SOS-minded. Okay? Starting with sustainability of the project. It is a crust. Current situation, there is limited funding, projects have a short vision, then naturally there would be tightened control, and then nurtures mistrust, nurtures rivalry, upsetting mutual trust. The goal, of course, is to make at least some projects able to walk on their 2 legs, keeping the momentum, sustaining the passion of the private sector, NGOs, etc. We have to think out of the box, how to sustain. Projects, we think they should better be scalable, replicable, people-centered, and driven by internal demand, rather than relying only on outside visitors. Out-of-the-box thinking. I think when we are short of financial capital, have we ever thought of making better use of the social capital? In the past 10 years or so, much of the project developments, etc., are being carried out, but so-called other than the government, private sectors, policy entrepreneurs, NGOs, etc. Make best use of them. But then we have to avoid nurturing competition and rivalry among them. There may be other solutions. How about entrustment? Over there is a garden in Hong Kong which is entrusted to a party to run, to operate. Can we adopt a village? Now that would take the administrative burden from agencies, etc., given us more time to be more focused and also more creative. Finally, I think all those projects will have to be based on science. When we are short of money, we say, okay, keep on. But have we considered whether they're effective? Can we do it better? When we are short of funds, can we prioritize? I think I just borrowed from Einstein, saying that think before we jump into action. And I think I'm convener of this expert group, comprised of ecologists, hydrologists, soil scientists, architects, etc. It's not easy. We've gone out knowing that we have to know the science, knowing that we have to know the life cycle of dragonflies, the food web. Science can help us to understand the status, trends, and threats, adequacy of previous plans, and also prioritize our actions. Now, I think in about a few years' time, about 3/4 of the world's population would live in cities. Cities is where the battle for biodiversity takes place. And allow me to quote, the city would determine the fate of the remaining biodiversity of our planet. And the battle for life would be won or lost over there. Ladies and gentlemen, let me end as I began. Hong Kong is a dense and compact city. Many other cities look to Hong Kong as an example. We have an opportunity to make it better. A better city for people to live and work on. I think that causes us to really think about the work that we have done in the past, how we can make it better. We have to be clear and decisive, clear about what we want to, decisive in what we're going to do. I understand that changes are uncomfortable, but somehow we have to change. Thank you for your attention.
I think we've just heard the cri de coeur from a very passionate scholar. And I know how much KC has done for conservation in Hong Kong, and actually not just in Hong Kong, also in mainland China and elsewhere. So thank you. Our next speaker is another very old friend, Mr. Chandran NAIR, who is going to talk to us about redesigning society, or whatever you want to talk about. Please.
All right. I notice a lot of you have your phones and computers on. Can you just put them away, please? The future is not digital. It's actually biological. So don't believe all the Silicon Valley bullshit. So students, future is biological, it's not digital. I wrote a piece about it. Okay, now I'm going to start. Can I have my... I'm not going to talk about Hong Kong because I spent a lot of time trying to help Hong Kong, but Hong Kong doesn't listen. Partly because Hong Kong was caught in political strife and its government was not strong enough to act, and we can't even get rid of plastic bags. 20 years. I wrote the first waste reduction study for Hong Kong, and 20 years on, we're still fighting about plastic bags. So that's another book I wrote about the need for a strong state. Draconian measures, because we are all lemmings, we will do stupid things, we need rules. And a crowded planet, human beings will need to be constrained because they are prone to bad behavior. So what I'm going to talk about is the traumas that we face because of the world we live in, the trauma of being addicted to your mobile phone, the trauma of opening your computer because you think that's where life is. It ain't. Get a life. So these are the traumas. So I'm going to just be very blunt, straight up. And this is a university, so universities should be places where you can say straight up things. True? Even in Hong Kong. Okay. All right. Next. So this is the world we live in. You all know that these are things we all talk about. The climate, biodiversity, land, and there's a whole host of other issues, the overreach of technology and all of those things. So most of us know about this, but most of us actually don't actually understand how these things are connected. So if I got 10 minutes, I'll just say, well, it's connected to the fact that we have an economic model that is at war with you, me, and everything else. It's called multinational companies. It's called the way we live. And we do not want to confront that reality that we have an economic model that is at war with everything. We don't even teach it at universities. Because at universities, you're not meant to talk about this. I teach at the Cambridge University sometimes, and even there, the business school will immediately react if the people in sustainability say we have an economic model that doesn't price the concept of externalities. I wonder if there's a single course in Hong Kong teaching the concept of externalities and how do you price it. I think it's zero. So the continuation of old ways of thinking, and we need a new approach. So this assault that the traumas that are infected is by our economy. So what is the economy for? The economy is not for, as Hong Kong typically says the most thing, it's for a stock market. The markets are raging. No, you don't create an economy so that you can have more cars, guns, and whatever, which is in the United States. No, you create an economy so that, in the most simple way, you make sure that the majority of people do not suffer from the drudgery of life and the traumas. Now, most of us in Hong Kong think the drudgery of life would be to be separated from our mobile phone or not be able to go to the shopping mall or things like that. But actually, for most people, it's the things you've mentioned as well. So that's the drudgery of life. And that's what the economy is for. And I think universities should be at the forefront of educating people about how to understand the world. The point is, you live in a small place like Hong Kong, and we think the center of the universe is Pacific Place or Taikoo Place or Tsim Sha Tsui. It's not. Go to China, you can understand a bit more what the real world looks like. So I'd always try and send that, send university students in Hong Kong to India, get to understand, or somewhere in Africa, and then really understand the world. So the question is, how do we redesign our society? And I call for a revolution. Because human beings have essentially taken it upon themselves to consume endlessly. The idea of consumption being at the center of the problem we have is not understood. It's simply not understood because we don't price consumption. So everyone talks about climate change, and before you know it, all the rich people have funds, and they want to invest in something. AI is the latest thing to solve climate change. The simple issue is carbon dioxide is simply the underpricing of our consumption and not pricing in CO2. Simple. So you have to actually ban things. You have to ban bad things. You have to price it. I mean, walking through that auditorium today, I was freezing. I don't know about you all. But why is it all so cold? Because energy is cheap. Nobody cares a damn. But if I was in charge of Hong Kong, vote for me, I would price electricity so high, you would all think twice. You would all think twice. And if you wanted to air condition a university so cold, then we would use technology. I would use AI to charge you for every half a degree you lowered the temperature beyond what we would dictate as being the medium, which would be about 24 degrees. So if you wanted to be at 19 degrees C, you go ahead, but we will charge you. Same at home. It's called putting in rules. We don't allow people to drink and drive. We don't allow people to carry drugs. We don't allow you to sniff cocaine. But we allow you to destroy everything else. So rules really do matter. These are just things that I'm talking about, eating animals. I mean, I'll give you one data just to show where human beings are. 1,000 years ago, the biomass of mammals on the planet, terrestrial mammals, was something like, I think, 99% or something, or 90% or something. Today, do you know what the biomass of human beings are on the planet? As a representation of the total biomass, human beings are about 30% or something like that. 65% or 60%. Sorry, I got it wrong. Human beings are, about 30%. 65% is essentially, guess what? The animals we eat, not animals. The animals we eat are about 64% of the biomass on the planet, and then wildlife is about 4 or 5. Great civilization. We've advanced. And now we want AI. And we'll talk more nonsense about things while we carry on. 1,000 years ago is different. So remember, human beings about 34%, animals just over 60%, and about 4 or 5% wild animals. Brilliant. This is called progress. This is our economy, and I can give you a lot of other stuff. Hong Kong is very good at wastewater, but I tell people, most people don't even know that most of the wastewater in the world is not treated. 75% of wastewater is not treated. That's 8 billion people going to the washroom 10 times a day, and it's not even treated. And then we have buildings, AI, fiber optics, and all that nonsense. And we're all interconnected, but we're really not connected. So I can go on and go on. But the other point of the economy is my point about the companies we respect. The largest company, one of the largest companies in terms of market cap is Amazon. What's their business model built on? Getting fools to buy things they don't need with money they don't have. You and me. Not me, though. I can promise I have never ordered anything from those guys because they're my enemy. But that's what it is. Turn us all into lemmings. And you're all addictions. I mean, I know people addicted, smart people. Went to universities, got degrees. All become lemmings and order junk. But more importantly is the business model is premised on completely underpricing everything. You see one, they say 3. Buy one, get one free. Where do they teach those voodoo economics? It's called business school, actually. They have one here. I used to teach at the Hong Kong University Business School, and after 3 years, I told the dean, I can't take this anymore. The students are just too dumb. I mean, I just can't they just come for an MBA so that you know that 35% increase in salaries, so I gave it up. But that's just to show you where we are. And then the threat of AI and all of that is completely dangerous. So what are the traumas that we face? But we have a generational opportunity, and I think university should be at the center of it, teaching people how to think. Lots of universities are focused on how to pass exams and get a job, not how to think. I'll give you an example, the best example I have. I have a biochemistry degree. You can learn chemistry, and you can then go and find a job how to essentially make a bomb for a defense contractor. Or you can decide to go and work for a chemical company and how to make the next version of a hydrodynamic paint that would improve the thermodynamic, that would improve the aerodynamics of the next Tesla. Or you could go and use your chemistry to essentially design the next waterless toilet, because toilets with water are not possible. So you can see what I'm trying to say here. So we have to redesign the way we organize and manage our socioeconomic activities. I've argued that car ownership is not a human right. right? So how do you do that? So you have to completely reinvent, innovate public policy, and repurpose professionals. But most professionals are essentially not geared towards thinking about these things. Most of you don't think about these things in the way you need to. Radical. In universities, this is not taught. Everyone teaches a little spectrum of the science involved, which is very important, but you have to put the big picture together, and then you have to, the science is important, but essentially you have to understand how the system works and what you need to do to essentially redesign all of these things. So humanity's greatest challenge is this. I won't go into all these details, but the persistent traumas we have created, how we run the economies, rising income inequality, access to basic needs, as you just pointed out. When I was in Africa, that was the decade of water, same problem got worse. Mainly why? In 40 years, we have added 4 billion people to the planet. I don't know how many of you know the maths. 200 years ago, 1 billion. 100 years ago, 2 billion. In 70 years, in 40 years, we've added 4 billion. The problem has just been exacerbated. We've got all the technology, we just don't know how to do it because the whole economic model is based on essentially consumption, wastage, and taking a shortcut. And that has to be essentially changed, and the only way you change that is through tough regulations. Companies don't do sustainability, sorry. They do a bit of environmental protection under duress, if push. But sustainability is more systemic, and that's can be only the responsibility of the state. So to all the students here particularly, and also those teaching, don't conflate environmental protection and pollution with sustainability. These are two very, very different things you have to think about. How we live, digital technology, that's going to kill us for sure. Mental health issues, we all don't need to be told about that in Hong Kong. And then the economics of overconsumption. Everything is driven towards you to buy things you don't need with money you don't have. And if you're middle class, to impress people you don't like. So how we produce and consume is also very important. The food we eat, the over-chemicalization and plastic scourge, all of this we know. So inconvenient truths that we have to face, confront inconvenient truths. How do we get here? We got here because we're asleep at the wheel. We're not really thinking critically about things. Our economic model is at war. We don't really understand what progress is. We don't understand what prosperity is. We use all the wrong metrics for all of this. But my God, if people like me come and speak, then it's like, oh my God, he's controversial. It's not controversial. Go and do the deeper study and think more critically. So the root causes is our collective denial. And my point here in coming here today is to say, what is this institute of the World Sustainable Development Institute going to do at Hong Kong USD? If it does the same old stuff, just talking about all this usual stuff, nothing changes. You have to be very radical. You have to ask, what is it going to do? It'll have to redefine what do we mean by prosperity? What do we mean by freedom? So what is the most important sustainable development objective for Hong Kong, apart from plastics and waste and air conditioning and wasting energy? Surely it's housing. We haven't solved this problem because the whole sustainable issue, development issue, has the environment, has social, and has governance. And then the whole ESG thing is another bandwagon of trying to camouflage the whole issues. Housing is the #1 sustainable development problem. And 20 years ago, when I wrote the Sustainable Development sort of master plan for Hong Kong, we warned the Hong Kong government that the biggest #1 issue was housing, and that it had to essentially confront that with the land issue. There's no shortage of land in Hong Kong, and how do you do that? So these are the typical issues, but you always think about it as, oh, some greenlands and some marine life and things. Those are important, but human beings in Hong Kong need a better quality of life, and 60% of Hong Kongers live in crap conditions. And that's the obligation of the state to do something about it, which it has abdicated. So you need to understand what the economy is. So we need for disruptive learning, and I believe this is what the Institute could do. Revolutionary thinking, debunk all the old ideas, and create something new. So I call for a revolution, straight up revolution. And so this is why the 21st century will be so different. Population peaking, climate, too much technology for our own good, and the crisis of capitalism, which is essentially underprice anything and get you to buy things you don't need. So young people all think about this. And of course, we have resource constraints. So I'm going to finish with my last 2 slides. So the context of this is essentially what China is doing. So China is the only country I know where the head of state has gone and said, do not ever think about launching environmentally damaging projects for growth or any attempt to breach the red line of ecological protection, even when we meet some difficulties in economic development. No American president will ever say this because this is against freedom and rights. You know, a naive idea, right? Now, is China struggling with this? Of course, 1.3 billion people. Will India struggle with this? Much harder than China. Why? 1/3 the land mass, and they got that incredibly important thing they think which is critical. It's called democracy. So democracy will not solve India's problems because you can't. So this is a political issue. So essentially sustainable development, the Institute, I think should look at what are the political systems that we need to essentially put in place. Because sustainable development is not about net zero. There is no such thing. If you're a scientist, you know this is all mythology. It's called rich countries offsetting against poor countries and say, you all grow trees and we will continue to produce good things. You all live in the forests, protect your forests. So this is very important. Now, all of those who know China know that the president doesn't say something before 1,000 people studied this. 1,000 people. Yesterday, I ran a conference virtually on China's foreign policy, and a Chinese scholar said just the phrase called a shared humanity, mankind, in China is interpreted in so many ways, and PhDs are done just on that. So I know when the president says this, this is not Barack Obama reading from a teleprompter and talking nonsense. I use Barack Obama because people think, my God, that guy knows what he's talking about. He doesn't. And no US president does, and does any British president know. This man knows what he's talking about. It's a political point. So I leave you to think about this because this is where I think the Institute should go. What does it mean? How can we take this statement in Hong Kong, 1 country, 2 systems, and Hong Kong take that message to the world? Put resources to it. Give some money to it. You know. Not a lot, but you know, enough. Oh, we could have it in a cheaper place in China as well. Yeah, okay. All right, so I'll just leave you with, you all heard of the Industrial Revolution 4.0. So we coined a phrase saying, forget the Industrial Revolution 4.0, which is all the Silicon Valley, California, kind of hippie stuff, you know. We live in the real world, and it's not Industrial Revolution 4.0, but we called it Insured Resilience 1.0. Start with the basics. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandran. You never fail. He never fails to stir up people. And in fact, because Chandra and I have known each other for so long, so many decades, that I remember the days when I used to listen to you earlier on, and you were less revolutionary in those days, and it was uncomfortable already. Today, you're very uncomfortable for a lot of people, but you're absolutely right. At the university, we should talk about these things. So our last speaker, thank you very much. Let me give you the mic. We have Dr. Alice Catherine Hughes, the Deputy Secretary General of China Biodiversity Conservation and Green, and she will talk to us about mainstreaming.
Yep, well, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today and to follow a lineup of really interesting perspectives. And I have the somewhat challenging job of bringing elements of that together and also trying to synergize it with some of the science that should, theoretically, be underpinning some of our decisions. And as has been very clear from our speakers already today, conservation, sustainability can only work when it takes everyone. It doesn't do any good if I sit up in front of an audience, speak to 100 scientists, and they go back to their desks and they type into their laptop, and maybe they publish a paper that probably almost no one will read. That isn't how we make change. Unless we have scientists going out there, forging partnerships, making sure that the information they have goes to somewhere where it can have an impact, we don't move forwards. And unfortunately, universities are terrible places at realizing that. especially for people early on in their careers, because they're told, focus on these metrics. You need that for a promotion. Those metrics aren't what will change the world. And we need to get better at making it easier for people to have an impact on the real world, because that is why people got into science. And you need to keep that passion. So I thought I'd start off with a statistic. This alarming statistic was from the State of the Planet report from WWF International, and stated that on average, since the industrial period, we have seen population declines of about 69% in wildlife populations around the world. And whilst this figure isn't perfect, it does show us that we are in a critical time for global biodiversity. And whatever statistic you look at isn't pretty. It's estimated that 1 million animal and plant species are threatened with extinction. Since the industrial period, we have lost a calculated up to 2.5% of species. And this isn't even appreciating the fact that, as scientists like me know, we haven't even described a lot of species yet. And every day we are literally losing species that have not got a scientific description. We are in the middle of a crisis. Since the 1960s, the global forest coverage has decreased by over 60%. And every year we lose 10 million hectares of forest. The Convention on Biodiversity was ratified in 1992. We've been talking about these statistics since before many of the students in this room were born. And yet when we reached 2020, after what was meant to be a decade of biodiversity, when through the Aichi targets we were going to turn it around, save the world, we failed every single one of them. And so how is it that we can actually start doing better? And it is more than just these statistics. The fact that we are now in the red on every single planetary boundary. And for those of you who are not familiar with the planetary boundary concept, basically, when you go into the red, you shift into irreversible change. There is no going back. But we can change how we go forward. And the way we do that doesn't take a few individuals, it takes everyone. And that's why, for us to truly reach these future targets, it takes actions of everyone, business, and individuals if we are going to see a real difference. So when people start talking about global biodiversity loss, they normally take the easy option, and they're like, oh, there's just too many people. It's a crisis. That's why. We can't do anything, there's just too many people. And to me, I say that's the lazy option. When we look at projections of population change into the future, by 2050, every country outside the African continent is likely to be showing a population reduction. By 2100, Africa will too. However, what has changed is how we consume. And our global consumption per capita has increased exponentially. Furthermore, what makes up those calories have changed. When you were children, when your parents were children, how many times do you think they ate meat every week? How much do you think they wasted? The reality is that what we eat has transformed. We now eat a diet that is full of fat, sugar, and protein, and so our per capita footprint is vastly bigger than it was decades ago. And the reality is, if we keep saying, there's too many people over there, the Africans are having too many babies. And that. And we don't fix that. We don't fix how we consume. Then by the time those countries demographically transition and they have the same footprint as us, our problem will get bigger. To give you a statistic, one person in Qatar consumes the same amount in terms of footprint as 30 people in Eritrea. So we don't fix the problem unless we fix how we consume. And again, this requires action across all of society. We also see a global homogenization of what makes up those calories. And so now we see a massive growth in things like oil crops. Palm oil from Malaysia and Indonesia. Most of it at the direct expense of primary forest. Soy, mainly from the Amazon. And now we see a growth in biofuel production. In fact, the EU forestry regulations increase deforestation in the Amazon because we have more biofuels, which is why we need to have holistic solutions that understand the drivers of these problems. It also highlights that we cannot develop solutions unless we look holistically at what is causing the problems in the first place. And so if we look to see at what is driving deforestation globally, we have commodity production in places like Asia, but these dark green areas, forestry is driving deforestation. The production of timber, normally in monocultures, or they've just got 2 species of pine that are not good for biodiversity. And so unless we start thinking about global supply chains, how we consume, what those regulations look like, we will fail. And one of the big problems with things like the biodiversity frameworks is they don't think about those impacts we're having elsewhere. It's all well and good having a national target, but unless we start thinking about where our goods are coming from, we're not going to have an impact on those biodiversity hotspots. And some of the EU deforestation, zero deforestation supply chains are starting to do that. Parts of the world, like most of Asia, are not even thinking about it. And it's all well and good having a roundtable on sustainable palm oil, even if it doesn't always reduce deforestation as much as we would want, but India and China are the main consumers of palm oil. So it doesn't do that much good if all of the palm oil going into the EU is suddenly deforestation-free if the major consumers are still importing deforestation. And that means we need to think about what those other supply chains look like, where we can reduce waste and where we can reduce per capita footprints. We also need to think about better targets, and I'm going to jump about in terms of different elements we need to be focusing on because, as I've said earlier, mainstreaming takes everyone in society. We need businesses on board through things like the Task Force for Financial Disclosures, TNFD. We need to have private industries involved because if their footprints don't get cleared up, we don't make progress. And we need individuals making better decisions on what their impacts are. In fact, while I talk about individuals, we're all in this room talking about sustainability. And then we'll go for a nice dinner. And I bet that there will be very few vegetarians sitting around the table. And we get this, me too, even at biodiversity conferences when we are all there talking about global conservation, and then the vegetarians don't have any food to eat. Unless we take personal responsibility for our own changes, when we know there's a problem, we cannot expect society to. And so we need to be better thought leaders and behavioral leaders as individuals, as well as talking about these bigger scale things like targets. Unfortunately, we also see a lack of reflection of both climate and biodiversity in targets. And when we talk about things like nature-based solutions, everyone's heard of them now, right? What does it mean? Yeah. So buzzwords like nature positive and nature-based solutions are now everywhere. But because of a lack of standards, often they allow greenwashing. Many of you may have heard of the Great Green Wall of Africa. The fact that some of the major solutions to climate change are plant more trees. What you probably didn't know is that many of these tree planting programs have a mortality in 3 years of between 20 and 80%. That there are firms that exist to literally plant trees, and in a few years' time they'll plant them in the same place again because that company will get revenue and they will get government subsidies for doing so. There are also no standards on if those trees are native. Often they will use eucalyptus because they're a fast-growing, valuable wood. They're also very thirsty and can cause regional drought exacerbation. Nature-based solutions need a basis in ecology. We now have a growth of the green bond market. Hong Kong is taking over. It was found that once a green bond was listed, standards went down. So when we talk about green finance, what are the standards? We now see a massive growth in climate offsets. What are the standards? And how are they going to close the loopholes? So if you have a sustainability institute here in Hong Kong, think about where Hong Kong is trying to lead in things like green finance. Because unless we fix the standards, it will cause loopholes which exacerbate the problem. And so I urge all of the young people in this audience, think critically. Because unless we think critically, we continue to swallow fake solutions. which just propagate more harm. And these are discussions that are not being had at the right levels in terms of fixing those loopholes and developing genuine solutions. So if we look at something like here, World Bank funded projects, and that's the deforestation they caused in global biodiversity hotspots. Now, all of those World Bank projects should have had environmental impact assessments. And in the ideal world, they would share that data because we don't have biodiversity data for most regions. Except in most cases, because there is no mandate to share that data, we don't have it. And so we have a lack of transparency from those kinds of financial organizations when we know that they are still propagating environmental harm. So we need to understand what we mean when we are talking about any form of goal target. There is a major problem with loose definitions. And so when I say forest, I want you to all understand the same thing. We had this earlier. Definitions matter. Things like poor definitions around forest means that when I go to China, people talk about rubber forests. But if that percentage forest coverage includes a whole load of monocultures that are going to be felled, it's no use to me as a climate solution, and it's no good for biodiversity. And so we need to make sure that we are all talking about the same thing, because if we do, we have standards that we can enforce. And here, as I mentioned earlier, this is the Great Green Wall of Africa. We have major deforestation across the Amazon that may reach a climate tipping point, meaning that global circulation patterns change. We have the loss of forests in Indonesia over peat. When those forests get lost, the peat dries out and it burns. But instead of conserving these regions, we are pouring funding into growing trees in a desert. And those trees will die. And this is getting global coverage. We need to think about what priorities really matter rather than where the best salesmen are for what sounds like an attractive target. And unfortunately, biodiversity scientists are often not very good at communicating what needs to be communicated. And so, as instructors, we also need to teach our students how to be better advocates for the systems that they hopefully care about, and for the science that they understand better than anyone else. And this is what it looks like. So you can see some of the planting here. Some of that looks like it's already died. Zip through slides. And so we need to make sure that we develop solutions that really work. So genuine nature-based solutions, we need to make sure that we have a mitigation hierarchy. Protect, restore, reforest. It's pretty basic. If you've got an old growth forest that provides lots of other benefits in terms of ecosystem services, that sits on peat, that is highly biodiverse, surely we should be protecting that before growing trees somewhere they don't belong. And from the desert and savanna scientists I know, they do not like the ecosystems they work on being a parking lot for trees that will die. This is not a nature-based solution. So we need to have better definitions, especially in agroforestry. We need to make sure that we understand how to develop targets that work, and we also need to look for better synergies. I will go quickly. I'll try to go quickly. So this looks at the synergy between biodiversity and climate hotspots for regional, biome, and national levels, because climate gets more funding than biodiversity. But if we just fund climate, we will fund monocultures or homogeneous forests, which aren't good for biodiversity. If we look at the overlap, we could actually protect effectively more than 90% of species across the whole of Asia. But it would mean special policies for places like Indonesia, where we have hyperdiverse regions. We can also use approaches like that of China's ecological conservation red lines. So ecological conservation red lines blend ecosystem fragility, ecosystem service provision, and biodiversity. And by doing that, they can develop a roadmap in terms of prioritization that isn't just good for people who care about biodiversity, but also does things like prevent landslides. Because whilst your local governor may not care about that weird bat species like I would, they do care about not having a flood over their city. And so by efficiently zoning land, we can find solutions that better work for everyone and that get get people on board. Because we also need to remember that if these solutions do not make sense economically, they won't be backed. And if they are not easy, they will not be sustainable in the sense that when priorities change, they will get dropped. So we need to make sure we have holistic solutions that reflect supply chains. Zero deforestation supply chains are a major part of that, because as long as we import deforestation, then we are literally driving deforestation in global biodiversity hotspots. We need to have better and more transparent impact assessments. Offsetting and bonds, as I mentioned earlier, need rigorous standards, especially in financial markets like Hong Kong, where now many organizations are investing in them, but we still have no standards. And it might be painted green, but just like in Alice in Wonderland with painting the roses red, it is not green, and we need to have standards. So as I said, it's taking off. It's expected to explode in the next few years, and it is something where there is no international regulation. And just to show you, it is something that is growing massively. I know that I am running out of time. I am coming to a close. So there is a major lack of standards. As I said, the listing may actually become less sustainable once they have been on the market, and we need to have careful management of landscapes. We also need to have initiatives like the Task Force for Nature-Based Disclosures being properly informed so that we have meaningful statistics. And they can actually now use things like this 4-dimensional thing that looks at real sustainability. And often when you look at sustainability, it only looks at carbon. And of course, that is only a small dimension of what sustainability should be. So I'm lastly going to talk about one other commodity. It was mentioned earlier. Hong Kong is a hub for wildlife trade. And when we talk about wildlife trade, people always think about illegal trade. But the reality is it's not all illegal. IPBES stated that we use about 50,000 wild species. Most of them come from the wild. And when we think about what we commonly consume that comes from the wild, things like fish, most of it is wild. Many of those stocks are declining. A lot of our timber still comes from the wild. Fashion trade, yes, we still consume things like raccoon dogs full of viruses and crocodiles which may have come from the wild, though actually most crocodiles are ranched, but the monitors, if you have a more exotic taste, they're probably wild caught, and there's probably not a sustainability assessment. We also did an assessment of trade into the US. You know, that highly developed economy, they wouldn't be consuming much wildlife, right? They consume just under 30,000 species of wildlife since 2000. Under the Kunming to Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the only index for wildlife trade is fish trade, sustainably harvested populations of fish, largely for consumption. So this little bit in the middle, except it's not this little bit in the middle, it's actually far less than that, because actually it's only looking at food fish, and if you have one of those exotic saltwater aquaria, those fish almost certainly came from the wild, because almost all marine fish are from the wild. They're not being captive bred. And so we need to think about what our footprint actually looks like. So I'm running short on time, so I'm going to give you a few closing thoughts while you look at these frightening figures. As I've said, sustainability takes everyone. We need push and pull strategies. That means there need to be incentives for good behaviors and punishments for bad ones. But we can't always look to other businesses to do something, because unless we do what we can as individuals, we will not see change. And one of the biggest drivers of market change is if there is a demand, there will be a supply. Demand better products. Demand better labeling. This is how we drive market changes, because if it's no longer economically viable to do something that is unsustainable, and there is enough regulation to monitor it and make sure it's not a greenwash, then we can see real world change. So thank you all for listening, and I hope that we still have time for a short discussion. Sheshani.
Please take a seat. Alice, I'd like to be your new best friend. So may I ask the other speakers we'll just spend a few minutes, because we are over time, and I know there is a next program for the speakers. Please. Please. I think I will stand. I think I will stand. You know, there is actually a great alignment in your talks, and I think you heard each other. And I would like to just use this opportunity to talk about what we might do at HKUST, because we have this new partnership. If I can just ask each one of you to say a few sentences to just share, because you've already given actually us some ideas. And we want to use Hong Kong, we want to use our collaboration in HKUST that is both local, national, and international. Perhaps, Alice, I'll start with you, because as I said, I want to be your new best friend. And you ended up with reminding us that Hong Kong is a trafficking center. Would you support that we should take that subject up on a kind of global basis, using Hong Kong as perhaps a lever for change?
That's a great question, and yes, I do. This is a highly developed economy locally. If we can't do better, where can? And so looking at what the patterns are, because we still don't have the data we would like, but also what is driving them could be a real mechanism for change at all scales. And so I think there are some very important lessons to be learned that could be done through that.
Right, and I think I'll just add here that actually Hong Kong has all the tools to do that, because we have all the laws in place. We have actually very good disciplinary forces in Hong Kong, the police, the customs, and the security officers, and so on. But we need the mainstreaming to get the community and the government to say that we want to do that in Hong Kong, right? And actually, it will have a national and international impact. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I look forward to seeing the successful results.
Well,
and happy to work with you in the process.
New best friend, new best friend.
Absolutely.
Well, Professor Lam, maybe I can come to you next. You had a cri de coeur, right? You know, you're someone who has spent decades trying to do many things to help. And right now, you shared with us that, you know, you almost sort of say, well, you know, I'm reaching retirement age and I'm chairman and committee members of these very important nature conservation related bodies. You're not sure there's going to be any money. And I think all the other speakers really touched on the importance of biology and ecology. How do you think we can use this center to have what kind of conversation that may be helpful for our local conservation efforts?
I think we have to focus on it. I think we need to focus on the key issues and find out how to make it work, how to click, okay? Those decision makers, to make them understand it is good for them, okay? There is little political risk behind. It's not easy. The question that intrigues me is, if we wish to convince someone to do something, what's behind their thinking? Why they are willing to do it, or they are resistant to do something which we think it is good. Now, I don't have the answer, but I think sort of dialogue, as well as some research that Alice has been doing, I think, showing the key figures, probably would be able to convince some to do something.
So what I'm hearing is, we'd actually like to have some, you know, heartfelt discussion backed by facts, scientific facts, for some of our decision makers, so that we can talk to them more deeply about what those issues are, so that as a community and as a government, we can do better priority. Now, Chandran, maybe I can come to you. You know, as you for people who don't know, Chandran used to run ERM, which is one of the biggest environmental consulting companies in Hong Kong, and I think you were MD for Asia. So he wasn't bluffing when he said, well, you know, I wrote these various plans for government at various times. Now, your organization, GIFT, it's global. And you're working with governments, with the private sector to, again, sort of change people's minds. For this center that is beginning to emerge, what might you want to do with us?
Sure. First, yeah, and I set up the first environmental consultancy in China as well. This was in 1992 or 93, before anybody even talked about this stuff. So the first thing I would say is much of the narrative around sustainable development is from the Western canon. It's outdated, right? So most of you probably don't know of any Asian person who is a global spokesperson on environment. We all know Jeffrey Sachs. We know that little girl from Sweden and things like that. They become famous. You know, it's a Tarzan and Jane story, right? So we don't have anyone. So the narrative is Western. There is a good amount of stuff that's good, but a lot of it is irrelevant to the parts of the region. The EU's actions on deforestation, etc., represent a certain ideological way of thinking about things, and therein lies geopolitical tensions, etc. So I think what the center should do should essentially create a new narrative. Not some Asian worldview and sort of, you know, Buddha thing, but a more holistic worldview of what actually this means. And therein lies, firstly, in my view, politics, economics, governance systems, why rights and freedoms will have to be redefined. And my understanding is this institute should not confine itself, can I say, to the Mickey Mouse stuff in Hong Kong. It's important, but it's Mickey Mouse. There's a much bigger thing. That's why my good friend is here. It should be a place that becomes a world standard think tank. We don't have any. We got all the money, but we don't have independent thinking. So it should be that. And therefore, it should be independent of the bureaucracy of the Hong Kong government, and dare I say, the bureaucracy of the university, because that stifles it. So how you do that, I don't know. I'm happy to help. But most people don't want me to be helping on these things. So I set up my own stuff, talk intellectual, because intellectual freedom is actually the most precious commodity today. Intellectual dishonesty is rampant. Politics, business, and dare I say, academic institutions. Most academic institutions have lost the intellectual honesty. You can't say what you want, even as a professor in a university. So I think creating this intellectually robust think tank, this institute, which is separate from all the nonsense that has gone on, that for the reasons you mentioned, nothing's changed. All the stuff's getting worse, as you mentioned as well. Why? Because we are caught in a way of thinking about sustainability that is defined somewhere in Cambridge University, Oxford, MIT, if you believe that, or somewhere in Harvard Business School, the Flat Earth Society, all of those things. We don't know anything else. We don't even write our own books. So this institute should create that, not some nationalistic Asian values nonsense, but reflective of the new world, multipolar world which we live in. And I think that's what this institute should do. But to do that, it should be separate from the trap of the Hong Kong government financial bonds and all of that, treating Hong Kong as though it's some sort of dollar sign, and then also devoid of the academic sort of constipation that will stop the rigor, the intellectual rigor. And you have to bring You have to bring radicals into the fore. You have to bring mujahideen, as we say. You have to bring people who are willing to question everything, who are outspoken. That's what Hong Kong's not good at. In every committee in Hong Kong I've been involved in, it's all mainstream. It's vanilla. No one wants to speak the truth. So I think that's what this issue you should do. And I think, Kristen, you should lead it. Yeah.
Well, you're challenging us, and James, I'm going to put you on the spot. Since you have accepted the invitation to come, under what circumstances might you give us some money?
Actually, that's really, really easy to answer. You have to do simply two things. Firstly, find out what nobody else is doing, why they're not doing it, and then do that. The second thing is rise to the challenges which global politics, global economics, global trading systems are trying to prevent us from talking about, and talk about those.
You're in the Chandran NAIR school.
Yes, and I would even.
That's very encouraging.
I would even dare to add something to his world threats in there by raising what is probably the biggest threat of all to climate. And it's not mentioned. It's not counted under Paris. It wasn't counted under Kyoto. And that's militarization. And why was military emissions and related military activity not included in Paris? Because President Obama, the good guy, said, if you include military activity, we won't fucking sign. So the biggest contributor to climate change is the one thing that is not counted. Research that, you'll have a bucket load of money.
Thank you. Dr. ZHOU, you are our new partner, and so we want to give you the last word. I think maybe this is the first time you've kind of really had a taste of us, right? What we're like and the talent that we have in Hong Kong. What would you wish us to do with you?
确实今天很有感触，这么多这么好的这个讲者和听众，我们特别想做什么？我们看到香
Can
港。
I just do some simultaneous translation for some of our friends?
Okay.
Yeah.
You want me to talk in English?
I think that would be good.
Okay.
Because we have some people who
Okay,
might
good.
not. Yes.
Thank you. And we really want to change the world. Hong Kong is a key hub. The stock market, the capitalism, the marketing economy is the core. And Hong Kong stock market decided to have ESG report, sustainable and ESG report. But we checked many of the reports. They are written and tested, organized by some auditor company. That's not right. It should be done through is the environmental-based guidelines, is environmental assessment of the company. And the ESG started by UNPRI is supposed to guide the companies to go the right direction, and that is what we think we, together with the university and together with this talented specialist, we should do the right ESG for the listed company, and through that company's efforts to guide, to move the traditional industrial civilization to transfer to eco-civilization. I think that's what we really want to start with. Thank you.
Well, this is a surprise, I'm sure, for our professors here. We have a number of people who are teaching this kind of green economics or green thinking, sustainability. I'm sure you're surprised. that, well, anyway, we're greatly honored that you want to be partner with us at HKUST, and that your first partnership idea to us is, why don't you check out these listed companies in Hong Kong? You know, really see how good their ESG reports is. That's quite a challenge. That's quite a challenge. Well, if I can...
Christine, if I could just one thing. In the discussion topics that you've mentioned, and it's something to which we've alluded, one of the questions that's on here is, how can Hong Kong learn from international best practices? Most international practices are not the best. What we should do is make our own.
Okay, let me explain why James is making that. We were given some questions we might explore during Q&A. I've ignored them. Because I think we don't have time, and I think the questions don't quite fit really the level of sharing that you have given us today. So we only have a few minutes left, and if
you want to be special, carve your own path.
This is my point, Christine.
This is what you're saying.
You know, I've been a consultant in the Hong Kong government for donkey's years. Every time, what are they doing in the USA? What are they doing in Britain? What are they doing in Germany? You have to design your own. You have to be creative. And now with these issues, write the new book and be the center of independent, radical thinking for the 21st century. Really, ask the questions. What is the military influence here? How does wars contribute to all of these questions? Nobody wants to talk about this in Hong Kong because we're scared.
We'll get sanctioned right away, right?
Yeah, we're already sanctioned, so we know who our friends and enemies are, right?
Very brief, before we end.
So given that we're ending shortly, I would say to everyone at all levels here, a philosophy I carry through life is lead, don't follow. Think about what you think matters and take that path, because especially in sustainability and conservation, we keep having the same conversations and they don't take us anywhere. We need to start branching out and looking at, okay, how can we really start changing things radically?
Thank you. Can I ask our head of department, who's going to be the university leader of this relationship, to say a few closing words?
This is a very, very good start, because I think we want HKUST to be a platform of discussion, and really the frank discussion and the critical thinking that is being demanded by the group here is something that we will use the WSDI as the discussion platform. And I hope that everyone keep your enthusiasm, and we will try to have more discussion like this. And I promise, at least in HKUST, we encourage this type of discussion, okay? This is very important. We are not shy as academics about discussing anything. We need to discuss it cordially with rules, but we encourage such discussion. And thanks a lot for everyone, and particularly this red rainstorm warning day, you're still here. So thanks so much for coming, and hope to see you more. Okay.